In some ways, this is the easiest sermon of the year, and in some ways, it isn't. We have a noticeably clear theme today. That old Christian conclusion you may have heard before. Jesus died and was resurrected, and all rejoiced. Easy. We could go with that. Or I could stand up here and repeat some trope about the return of spring and the blooms of the earth that once died live again. I suspect having preached one of those two sermons, you would either skulk off wondering to yourself what theology I had adopted, or happily skip off to the Easter egg hunt or a brunch with friends and family, nod and smile and wish each other a happy Easter. But if I did either of those, I would waste the opportunity today to say something important. Let's be clear. Here, we aren't sure about Jesus coming back from the cross, and we already know that spring has sprung, robins singing us into the morning. But what we don't know is exactly why we as Unitarian Universalists might give two feathers about resurrection. I want to clue you in. It has to do with you. Now, this Easter, the idea of not letting it go to waste came to me, and I remembered Fred Craddock, the late Christian preaching professor who told a story about Easter morning in a church he once attended. Fred was not a big, booming, evangelical preacher. Rather, he looked like he sold insurance. And once he described his voice as a splinter on a post whistling in the wind. But he told great stories, and he told this one I love. He said he came to church on Easter, and there was a tradition in that church. Every year they would put out 500 lilies on the altar, sometimes arranged in a giant cross, sometimes strewn about artistically. They were memorial lilies. Church members gave $5 each for a lily to remember a loved one who had died. The names of those being remembered were printed in the program. 500 names remembered by the giving of the lilies. $5 given for each name. 500 lilies. It was beautiful, he said. And then, in the 16th year of the tradition, an elderly member of the church came up to the chancel after the service and said she was going to the hospital and she'd like to bring a lily to a friend. She said, I know I can't know which one I gave, but they're all alike, so can I take one? And without getting an answer, she went up to the cross-shaped 500 lilies and took one out. And in shock, she turned to those who were remaining in the sanctuary and yelled, "They are plastic!" All of a sudden, there was a lot of concern. But we gave $5 for each lily. And if they're plastic, that means maybe we gave $5 last year for the same lilies. Someone in the congregation commenced doing the math. Huddles formed. The tradition was in collapse. The mathematician came up to the chancel and said, well, over 15 years, $5 for 500 lilies, that's $37,500 for the same plastic lilies? The minister sensed an uprising, gathered the concern on the chancel and tried to defend the plastic lilies. They were the same lilies, he said. They were stored carefully and they are beautiful. Then he said two things. First, he said the money was used to help people in need and was used for good. Some people accepted this. His second defense was theological. After all, he said, The plastic lilies are more appropriate to Easter because they always bloom and they never die. After all, he said. And the crowd might have answered like that. We don't know. The story is now apocryphal. After all, he said, we don't want to waste Easter. Now, the preacher had some explaining to do, the least of which was not about how they used the lily money or whose idea plastic lilies were, but rather his accompanying theological point, which, if I'm guessing, and as a preacher, I know something about this, he must have blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Because for one, plastic lilies never bloom, so they do not die. He is wrong on that. But he is right on not wasting Easter. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. To waste Easter is to confuse the fact that Easter is about robins returning and daffodils sprouting, or about a literal event that took place 2,000 years ago with the fact that Easter is about betrayal and death turned into life and something new. Not a balm that just takes away the pain, but about transformation. Easter is not about renewal. Easter is about resurrection and recommitment, which are different things than renewal. It is taking something that dies and seeing how it lives again. It is seeing the depths of the matter in life and being changed by them for the betterment of all. It is realizing that something in your life must die for you to live. That is why this is the hardest sermon of the year. Because it takes all year for me to find an Easter story not written in the Gospel of Luke. Not a literal story about empty tombs, and not a story about springing bunnies, but one about real, impactful transformation. And this year I came across this story. Many of us will remember one image from the Vietnam War. If I said to you, what is that one image from the Vietnam War that you remember, you probably will conjure up the same one that I would conjure up. That for me, seeing it as a child instantly turned me against the war. For me, that image of seeing children in wartime changed me forever. And particularly, this image of children running down a rural road away from a burning village. Their clothes burned away by napalm, anguish on their faces, confusion and war behind them. Do you have that image very clearly in your head? For obvious reasons, I am not showing that famous photograph today. You will have to look that up if you want to refresh your memory. Black and white image that lives in us. Or you can Google Vietnam napalm children, and I'm sure that will be the one that comes up. The only thing we knew about the girl in the center of that photo was that she had narrowly escaped the fires of the attacks on her village. What we know today is that her name was Kin Phuc Pan Thi. The reason this image comes to mind today is because of Kim Phuc's life. Her life was forever changed by that day, 50 plus years ago. And 50 plus years later, she resurfaced to tell the story of the rest of her life. You see, Kim was not expected to live after that attack. When her parents found her 3 days later, she had been left to die in a death room at the local hospital. She had 17 surgeries to fix her. She could not sweat after that. You imagine in her mind what she wanted to do to her life. Upon finally returning home, Kim thought she was returning to a normal and peaceful existence, but everything had changed. Her family home had been destroyed, her body was covered in scars, and many of the people she knew were gone. She said once she returned to school, she was ostracized. She wanted to wear short-sleeve shirts like the other girls and would compare her two arms, one beautiful and smooth and the other scarred. She said, "I had a dream to look like the other girls. I felt sorry for myself." Kim also feared being alone. She said, "I thought I would never have a relationship because of my scars." And then the Vietnamese government turned Kim into a war symbol that we never saw. The communist agents who watched her and officers who picked her up from school would force her to do media interviews about the evils of the South Vietnamese. She said, "I wanted to be left alone to study, but they would not leave me alone. I wanted to be free." And in 1986, Kim obtained permission from the Vietnamese government to study at the University of Havana in Cuba. And during her studies, she met a young Vietnamese man. She was worried what he would think of her scars. But as their relationship developed, he told her, "Every time I touch your scars or see them, I love you more because I know you have suffered." They were married in 1992. And then they were granted a honeymoon in Moscow. I don't know what a honeymoon in Moscow was like in 1992, but it's what was offered. And on the return from their honeymoon, the airplane stopped to refuel in Newfoundland. And Kim and her husband deplaned and asked the Canadian government for political asylum. They arrived in Canada with nothing. But Kim told her husband, "We have each other and we have freedom." Today, Kim and her husband have 2 sons, who Kim called "my miracles." And this is what happened to Kim's heart. Looking back on her life and struggles, she said, "I stopped asking why me. Instead, I asked, God, please help me." And one day on the streets in Toronto, a photographer spotted her, and the next day she was once again thrust into the public eye. She said, "I wanted to hide from that photo. I wanted to lead a quiet life, but the photo haunted me." But Kim said she realized that if she was unable to escape it, she could use the attention for peace. She said the picture, once a symbol of her pain and suffering, became a powerful gift. She said her enemies that she kept on a list became the names on her prayer list. And she wrote a personal testament that goes like this: "Having known war, I can know the value of peace. Having lived in government control, I can know the power of freedom. Having known pain, I can now know love. Having known poverty, I learned to value what I have. Most important of all," she wrote, "having known hatred, power, and corruption, I know the value of faith and forgiveness." She said, "I forgive, but I do not forget. Faith and forgiveness are more powerful than napalm could ever be," she wrote. And then this. In 1994, Kim was named as a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador. She traveled the world promoting peace and understanding. And she began the Kim Foundation, which helps to heal the physical and psychological wounds suffered by child victims of war. Kim travels to meet so many of these innocent victims with the intention of restoring hope to their lives. She says, "I don't cry for myself now. I cry now for other children." Her message is simple. If that little girl could learn to forgive, everyone else can too. If everyone can learn to live with love, hope, and forgiveness, there would be no need for war, she writes. And this is Kim Phuc today. This is Easter, my friends. This is Easter. It is a story about a woman who found a way to turn what is painful and hopeless or has died in her into hope and forgiveness and love. Easter is embodied in these words of a girl once terrorized in war who became a forgiving mother of peace. Such words have been spoken before. They are the ancient words of the Islamic prophet who said, "Grant us the ability to find joy, not in the strident call to arms, but in stretching out ours to grasp our fellow creatures in striving for justice and truth." They are the words that Black Elk spoke when he said, "Look upon the faces of children without number, that they may face the winds and walk the good road to the day of quiet." They are the words of the Obijwe prayer. "Grandfather, grandmother, sacred ones, teach us love, that we may heal the earth and heal each other." Ancient words that have spoken Easter, my friends. Not that Jesus died and returned, but that his dramatic story has us reflect year after year on stories of hope and transformation and change that lift up life in the face of despair. That is what Easter is. All of it in the service to the mission that Jesus and his followers were originally about, to face the forces of empire which want to snuff out hope and life, but instead remind us to love one another even when it is difficult to do. To live for a faith in humanity that does not create exclusivity or the condemnation or death for the most vulnerable in our midst. That is Easter. To know that resurrection is as common an occurrence in our lives as it is in her lives or his lives. No matter how many attacks on our trans children or pills or rights they take away or death that comes from state violence or disdain for the poor and the vulnerable, to know that life will rise and triumph. That is Easter, my friends. And so the minister was wrong. Plastic lilies don't bloom, my friends. Resurrection doesn't mean everything dies and comes out clean and happy. It means that everything that blooms dies, and that in its dying it can bloom again. Resurrection happens through hardship and struggle, change, and the welcoming of love and faith and forgiveness into our lives. The minister is not right. The plastic lilies be damned. But he is right that we should not waste Easter, just as we should not waste our lives. Easter cannot be wasted if we practice faith and love and forgiveness in the face of the impossible that we meet. And if we can't do that, then just be kind to one another today. And feel the energy of a day that comes beaming through this age-old story and through the story of Kim Puk and through the many stories of transformation everyone in this sanctuary could tell. Just be kind, and that would be a start. Easter is here, friends. Let's not waste it. Let's indulge its hopeful force. Let's welcome it. Let it be risen in our midst today. Amen.